Aloha and welcome to The Art of Life. I'm your host, Willow Chang Alion, and we broadcast live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. here in the heart of downtown at Pioneer Plaza. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, you're always welcome to drop us a line at Facebook at The Art of Life with Willow Chang. My name is too long, so my other last name won't be there. Art of Life with Willow Chang, or you can contact Jay Fidel. He's our producer. Our show is always dedicated to profiling individuals of interest who are bon vivants, innovators. They bridge tradition and innovation. And our next guest fits the bill. We've got Ernie Provencher in the house. Ernie,
hi.
Welcome. So as everyone knows, in my pursuit of journalistic integrity, I often know the people who are guests. It's like, who are the people in your neighborhood? And I've known and collaborated with Ernie off and on for about 20 years in many different capacities, but there's so much more to learn. And a lot of times sitting in the chair is a chance for me to also learn about my friend and my guest. And I hope you guys spread the word, share these links, and let your friends know what a font of inspiration Hawaii is. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I'm glad you're doing this.
Me too. It's kind of cool. We
Cool.
say it's an FCC-free zone. I don't know if that's true, but we're going to stick with it.
Good.
Is it? The omniscient God just said, the voice said something. We are FCC free, and you know what? I mentioned this last week, but since I have you as my wrapped audience, please know that May 15th, 2014, there's going to be some big decisions made about net neutrality. If you're seeing petitions floating around on the internet, I would highly encourage you to sign those, because everyone should have a fair crack at promoting their interests, their worldviews, their businesses. There just doesn't need to be the fast lane for big business and the slow lane for the rest of us little guys. So please be activists, and even if it's an armchair activist, click, sign those petitions, and get it going. Now, back to our regular programming. Ernie, we want to know all about you. We want to know how you got into music, how you came to the islands, what your proclivities are, what your taste range from, so just take it away.
Okay, and I do have a wide range of experiences and tastes, that's true. I'm from the East Coast of the United States, so I grew up in the Boston suburbs. And, you know, getting into music, that's an interesting question. There wasn't any music in my family except for LPs and things like that. Yeah. And nothing going on along those lines, but for whatever reason, I got the bug early. So I remember hearing somebody play guitar and people playing violin and just loving the sound of it all. And I know I remember asking my parents, hey, could I play violin? They said, well, maybe not. Can I play clarinet? That was a little bit closer.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, but the one that finally clicked was a guitar, and I'm glad it did. So
the guitar is kind of the equal opportunity instrument, but I'm wondering, as I'm thinking aloud, violin seems to sometimes have associations of, dare I say it, class associations, or maybe people think that if you're playing the violin, if their only association is classical music, they might think that's the upper echelons of society. Do you think that might have been something? You know, clarinet, you had Benny Goodman and you know, big band, and maybe people were Ava Nagila.
That's a good question.
Accustomed to it?
I bet it was just age. I think it was just I was so young when they first asked, so like, no, wait, I suspect it was that.
No prodigy in my household, damn it.
But it's interesting you mentioned that question, because now for violin is being used so much more widely in music. So
Lindsey Sterling.
Yeah, if you see a pop or even a rapper, they can have a violin section accompanying them. So
it's always the cue, like, we're serious, and now we have the string section. Like, if you ever watch Saturday Night Live, whenever they have the live music segment, if they're getting serious, they'll have the string section. It's one of the few venues on our pop TV that you can actually see strings.
That's true.
Yeah.
And a lot of pop acts are doing that.
Very cool.
And I think I mean, that's great, because it means that there's more inspiration for people to take a violin and so on, which I think is great. Anyway, guitar is what got my interest. So I remember hearing a guy playing it, a neighbor, really loved it. And so I got one. I started learning rock and roll tunes right away. I got a great teacher. He was an old school teacher. He was named Maître Boucher. He was an old Frenchman living in the United States. Great teacher, very hard-nosed, and I was a young guy.
Yeah.
And so I learned a whole lot from him, to the point that I got to be his assistant teacher. Wow. So after a while, I took on the really young children who came in when I was in high school. And I was his associate, or his assistant, not associate.
Yeah.
And he also was great, because he encouraged me to learn very classical guitar style, but also be in a rock and roll band, which he thought was great. He'd have all his best kids make rock and roll bands together. And play.
That is really cool. That cross-pollination is so important. It's so essential. I think it's kind of what helps open people's ears and their eyes and their minds, that it's not limited to your own point of reference.
Yeah, and it's not limited to only one style.
Yeah.
Which I agree with you. And actually, that's something, since I do a lot of teaching now here in the islands of string and band instruments, that's something I incorporate in it. Bring in all different styles of music into what's happening, which actually is a bigger view of what interests me in music that's going on now anyway.
Absolutely.
But it's good for teaching. It's good for kids that they can do that. And I know that sometimes they say, oh, it's so much fun that we get to play a modern piece as well as an old piece. But that's how they describe it, but you know.
Exactly. You're like, please play Adagio for strings at my funeral. Right?
Yeah.
Wow, you know, we're both teachers, and
Yeah.
I like to do some of the same things. We had discussed this last weekend. I have some friends and students who are studying violin, and one who's taking up the accordion. Hello, Helen.
All right.
And, you know, I like to slip them on the down low, that doesn't sound really good, Middle Eastern or Balkan or Near Eastern music, simply because they may or may not have been exposed to that, to give them a point of reference to realize that the wealth of music that can be created from your instrument is not limited to polkas or waltzes or whatever your teacher might be turning you on to, or what you are aware of. There's just a whole world of like cool stuff out there.
Very cool stuff, and those are some of the areas in Balkan areas, Middle Eastern areas that is incorporated. And as you know, because we've worked together doing that kind of music.
So where did you go from La Guitarra, Toca La Guitarra, and Boston? You continued on, clearly.
I continued on, yes. So, I was in UMass Amherst as an undergraduate student in the same state, but in the western part of the state. And I got into, when I was in high school, I started playing bass guitar.
Okay.
And so when I got to college, I got a double bass, an upright bass. Fell in love with playing jazz. And for a while there, I really went deeply into jazz. But I was always playing in bands. And all the way through undergraduate school, I got an English degree, but I always knew I was going to be a musician, and that was my focus all the way through. So I was in Western Massachusetts. And then after that, I got to live in some interesting places. First of all, I think, right out of school, we went to Boston for just a short time. I went to Antioch College because I was a big fan, along with a few friends, of Cecil Taylor, who was a very avant-garde pianist. It just kind of, it's hard to describe the music. It's avant-garde, jazz, classical, some kind of combination. Great musician. And I went and played his ensemble. It's called the Cecil Taylor Black Music Ensemble.
Wow.
That's how I described it. It was a great experience, really fun. And I was doing that, enjoying it a lot, and I got connected to play a musical in Washington, D.C., which was just odd. It was because when I was in school in UMass Amherst, there were some people at Amherst College, including this guy Jim Steinem, who was Meatloaf's musical director and writer.
All right.
Yeah. So he wrote a rock musical, and for some reason he chose his guys from Amherst, and they asked me and one other guy from UMass, who they knew, to come and play the show at the Arena Stage in D.C., which was great. A couple of interesting things about that. One is, so I was going from a very avant-garde ensemble, way out, to a musical. And a lot of the other people in the band were like, Ernie, you're selling out.
That's the crime for all artists. Oh no.
How can you do that?
Success and money, heaven forbid.
Yeah, but Cecil Taylor and his guys in his band were like, great, Ernie, that's great. We've enjoyed having you. That's great that you're going to do that. That was very interesting there, because he was the king of way out playing, and he was saying, oh, great. He had a mature attitude about it. So I did that show, and then I lived in Boston, played a lot of bands, and then I said it's time to go to New York City, because New York is...
It's the epicenter.
It's the epicenter. Really? I mean, Boston is a great musical environment, but I really, really wanted to go to New York and play.
I want to ask you something about things that are like far out or way out, and with the understanding this is your definition, which is great because you're my guest, but for a lot of people who maybe they're uninitiated to jazz, and it's such a huge, diverse genre of music. I mean, it's a huge spectrum. What would you define far out? Would that be like playing out of the standard keys? Would that be like Keith Jarrett with that weird like singing that you hear in the background and he's singing along, or is this like prepared strings, or is it fusion of different forms or spoken word? Like, what kind of things constitute far out?
Being far out.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question. Well, what I would do is put that a little bit in historical reference, because when I was playing in that ensemble, it was like the 70s.
Okay.
So during during the 60s, there was a whole movement in jazz music where the things that made it far out were not playing the chord changes, not necessarily taking one of the classic tunes. One of the great ways of playing jazz is you have a beautiful classic tune, and you know this well because you sing those tunes. And you play sometimes too on them as well. So yeah, exactly, kazoo. So sometimes you play on that kind of form. It was when music started to eliminate form in some cases, not necessarily stay in a constant rhythm. You could play with rhythm in various ways.
Right.
Not have, it's hard to say not have rhythm, but not have pulse, not have metrical pulse.
Okay.
Do something else. Textures, extreme textures, which was when saxophone players would literally kind of scream on their saxophones.
I like that extreme texture. It sounds like a band right there.
It's a great concept, extreme textures. And that's something we'll talk about later because that's something going on in a different way now. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So that was what I would say is avant-garde, and also pure improvisation, no rules, which sometimes those kind of ensembles where we would just play and there was no rules. And I've done it now and then since then. In fact, before I was here and I lived in Hong Kong, I played in a group that did that. We literally would just go into a club and play and not say anything, and nobody knew anything was going to happen, and you just play and you make it up.
Now, in that kind of improvisation, because this is a theme that comes up consistently in the art of life, because life is like improvisation.
Right.
But do you find that it relies more on you trusting yourself or trusting the people you're playing with, or is it a combination of the two?
It is a combination for sure. Because if you don't feel comfortable with doing it yourself, it's not going to work. And if you can't communicate with them, it's not going to work. However, that's the interesting thing, because obviously sometimes it's going to go better than other times in that context.
Do you find that in those environments that there's kind of a natural, I'm going to use this term, alpha? Does it, like a person, is there someone designated as a leader, or does sonically someone kind of rise to the top as a leader or establish cues, or is it just kind of like you're trading off and everyone just contributes what they feel is appropriate at that time?
Usually in my experience it's more the latter, but it could happen that there's somebody, or that somebody's either alpha throughout, or more likely it's what you describe, everybody doing it equally, but somebody becomes alpha for a while. Because that's kind of what happens, right?
Yeah.
Maybe things are not happening and somebody does something that has a very positive effect on the direction that the improvising goes in. And then you coalesce around that concept, either doing something like it, or doing something supporting it, or doing something contrasting it, however that may work. So, of course, sometimes somebody's just so good, or so interesting, or so different, they become the alpha person in that context, because I just like, let's say I'm playing in that context, and I hear this, and I just really like that. I just want to do that.
Which brings me to this. A lot of artists are always seeking that flow. It's kind of like if you're swimming in the ocean and there's that current, and it's almost as if you don't have to work, it takes you there. So there's many things to prepare, but there's not necessarily a guarantee. You know, some will say, oh, well, this is why you have your technique or your form, or maybe you have you wear your favorite shirt or your favorite socks, or you have a breathing exercise. But I mean, to some degree, there's not a guarantee that that will happen. But when it does, do you find yourself being cognizant, like, wow, man, I'm on fire, or this is like really jamming, or we sound really good, or is it that you're so enveloped and just enjoying it, you don't even have time to acknowledge it, or does it happen after and then you're like, wow, we were just kind of like, you know, just transported to another time and dimension?
I think more of the acknowledgement for me occurs after, but some occurs when you're in it.
Yeah.
Because you know when you're in it. When that zone happens, and that's what's great in art.
It is.
Whenever you get in that zone, I think you said effortless, and that's what it is. And the cliche you hear, and it's not a cliche, it's true, you feel like you're channeling it.
Yeah.
You feel like it's just happening, you're just letting it happen, and it's almost like it comes from elsewhere, except it's a combination of elsewhere and from inside you, and from inside the other people. And that's a great moment. And but I feel like while I'm in it, I'm not so likely to go, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
It might feel that way,
Yeah.
but you're too much doing it or feeling it to acknowledge it until later. And then later,
Right. Because that's kind of almost
step.
stepping outside the self to assess what's going on.
Yeah, you step outside and assess. And there's the subjective quality. And this is a big mystery to me. Sometimes you'll do something and you think, oh, that really wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And everybody outside loved it.
Yep.
Or you listen to a recording of it and it was good.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
It's true.
Some-
It's indeterminate. I would also say we live in this world exceedingly now where everyone is trying to do, maybe not the archival process, maybe they don't think of it as such, but my God, hello selfie. I mean, everyone is trying to record things. You go to a concert, I went to The Cure, you see 1,000 phones and people are recording the concert, and I think, dude, why are you recording the concert when you're actually there? And what are you going to do, like watch this at home on your phone?
And is it going to be anything like near as good as observing the concert there?
Exactly. But I find that it seems that that magic is more inclined to happen in the absence of recording. I mean, when you know it's good and you're like, gosh darn it, I wish the camera was working, or I wish someone was able to record that because we were really smoking, we were on fire. And it seems to be in those moments when it happens is when there is no recording. You're at someone's living room and you're jamming, or you're dancing at someone's birthday party, and it's just like you're really in the moment, and you have nothing other than the memory to sustain you and to float you and know that it was good.
And you often say, I wish that was recorded.
Exactly.
Often afterwards, yes. That can happen. I think that you're right, though. That's the interesting thing, being at a big concert and seeing everybody taking the pictures of it and keeping track of it.
It's bizarre. Even at recitals, I mean, in small time, I can understand as a parent, like you want to have some memento, but what are you losing in that process of trying to record everything on a little phone?
Yes.
I mean, I think something might be gained, but something is lost. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think, and I had 2 children, and they did plenty of recitals, and I almost never recorded it. And that's because I just wanted to listen or watch.
Chances are someone else is recording. They could send you a link or something.
Yeah, that too. That can happen.
For sure.
That's quite good.
Indeed.
That can definitely happen.
So after the Big Apple, or in the Big Apple, take us from there.
Yeah, so I went to New York, and it was so great. And when I first went there, I did one thing that I've done a lot in my life, which is I was a dance accompanist. I was a modern dance accompanist. Because to make money when I first arrived in New York. So I played for a lot of dance classes. Dance is one of my great passions that I love to see or be involved in.
Yeah.
I'm the lecturer at UH in music for dance. I teach the dance course for music majors, and I've written music for a lot of composers. My wife's a dancer.
Phenomenal dancer, might add. Hello, Betsy.
Yeah, Betsy Fisher, my wife, and I've written a lot of music for her. And I met her in a dance class in New York, of course. But I went there and started playing dance classes, and then from there I just branched out to playing gigs, meeting people and playing gigs.
Yeah.
And of all different kinds. I did do a lot of commercial work when I was in New York, so I played on like jingles and movies and things like that. A lot of jingles, a lot of commercials.
Yeah.
I did that quite a bit. I played behind a lot of singers who were sometimes cabaret or pop singers, sometimes jazz singers. And then I did jazz gigs, I did a lot of rock gigs. I did a lot of recording work. I did Broadway shows and off-Broadway shows, mostly as a sub on Broadway, but I played quite a few shows. And then I also just did as much as I could. I did some big gigs with some big people, did some big touring. And it was a freelance life. It was a freelance life. And it was really fun to be in New York and be a freelancer, and it was exciting. I was there in the 70s and 80s, so it was a really, really great time to be there.
Exactly.
Very, very good.
I wanted to ask you something about dance because, I started my dance journey in hula, and in hula it can be very organic, and your kumu does the oli, and they chant, and they have the ipu, or they might sing and do their own accompaniment with the ukulele. So in that environment, having live music was normal. But I have to admit that when I went to a modern dance situation at UH, I remember the first time they had Jan Jeffries or Art Koshi on the piano, and I was just blown away. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a special day. Like, they had live accompaniment. And then the next day they had live accompaniment. And the next day they had live accompaniment. And then I think I had asked them, they're like, wow, is there like a special occasion? Like, why do we have live musicians? And they're like, it's like this all the time. And I had no point of reference. I mean, I'd seen like archival pictures of Eartha Kitt taking class with James Dean, with Catherine Durham, or Pearl Primus, and I thought that was either something that happened strictly in New York, or with big companies, or it was a past trend that had maybe come and gone. And so I was so surprised to see live music.
It's great, isn't it?
It's such an amazing experience. I mean, it's very, very different. You have no choice but to stay present when the music's live because it's so organic and it has the ability to be improvisational.
Yeah, and when you're the musician, that's a lot of fun too, because you're on the other side, and usually you're just one musician. There's a few exceptions, but usually just one person, and you get to essentially drive the class. As far as the people moving around, if they're moving across the floor, if they're moving in place, more stationary but still moving. And that's super fun. And it's also super challenging, trying to find the right thing. By the way, I'm curious about that because I have a feeling there's a little bit less live music in dance classes these days because of technology. Yeah. Because I know, and I asked Betsy about this, and she said people do come in to do a class once in a while and choose not to have the accompanist, which does seem strange, doesn't it? Yeah. But for some people, that's their preference because they have what they know they want to use for the class on their iPod or their iPhone or something, and they go that way. But no, it is a fantastic thing. and it's great fun to do it, and I've always liked being in accompanist, so, you know, good fun.
There's definitely a relationship, ideal, we're speaking of ideals here, where dancers, it's essential that they pay attention and they're aware, and there's the conversation that's going on with musicians. And I would say it's the same in a musical setting, like, oh, singers, for those of you who treat your musicians like just a backup band or a pickup band, just don't do that, man. Like, it should be a conversation.
Yeah.
Do you find when you're teaching class, is it something that you articulate or you try to teach or share that awareness? Because I think people maybe have to be taught that if they're not aware of it already.
In teaching the music for dance class at UH, yeah, I address that. Actually, that's one of my days of a lecture is working with musicians.
Yeah.
And sure, I address that totally. And I even say, by the way, and I point out ways that people count differently, and I point out, you know, confusions that can happen. I talk about the concepts of how does a dance teacher and a musician work together effectively. You know, what do you do if it doesn't work?
Dancers like everything in 8.
Yeah, or yeah, there's many odd counts that happen. But if you're used to it, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
But if a musician's not used to it, they could be like, I don't get it. You know, they might be confused by that.
Even in the singing set, I'm like, it's in C, and they're like, is that C? Is C your starting note? Like, and I'm like, are you asking me this? Like, you expect me to remember circle of fifths? It's been ages.
Right.
So,
well, so I do address that in the class. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I do that, and then I bring it up maybe one more time too, and we do a lot of other things about trying to have, part of the point of the class is to give the dance students basic knowledge of basic music things, and also just more connection with it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
How much of that would you say would be language or nomenclature, and how much of it is just sensitivity? You know, sometimes people feel they assert that to speak the language you have to have the terminology, but can you get the message across even if maybe you lack the vocabulary that people are using, as long as you're clear or your intention is to make a connection?
In that classroom context?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, but I do also teach them a lot of musical vocabulary.
Okay.
I mean, to the point that actually on the exams when they have, it'll say, define this term. They can use their own definition, but define this term. Yeah, so I do both things. I do both things.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too, because I have one student this year, really smart woman, and but she was just learning these terms, and she wrote one paper in response to a dance. One thing they do is they look at dances online and then write a response to talk about the music and the dance.
Okay.
So she was using these great words, but not using them quite right. You know, so I pointed out, I said, hey, this is great that you're trying to do this, but by the way, this means this, and this thing here doesn't mean anything, and this is why. But she was very excited about it. She said, I kind of thought that, but I wasn't sure.
Oh.
She said, I just wanted to try and use the words.
Isn't
nice.
that awesome? You know,
I
have a friend. I won't say what they do because it might be a big reveal. But many years ago, were trying to describe to me that their knee was screwed up. Can we say that? It's FCC free zone. They said, oh, you know, my knee is screwed up, so therefore I'm having a hard time doing this movement. But they didn't use the word screwed up. They said, yeah, like my knee's like totally matriculated and having a hard time doing like this move. And I was thinking, matriculated? Like that's a fancy word to study at like a educational institution. But I didn't have the heart, and I didn't want to be a jerk and say like, what are you talking about? But it's funny because 10 years later, I still remember like, dude, their knee was matriculated. I mean, it sounds cool, but it just doesn't relate at all to what they were trying to describe.
Sometimes you remember those funny words.
You do.
Once in a rehearsal room in New York, a guy who was going to record a band that I was in, a producer was there, and he said, when you do this record, I like the way this band sounds. I want it to be spontaneous. That's a great word.
That's awesome. And I mentioned this last week with Gene Park. New York Times Magazine has this great little thing that every week they have a word that should be a word.
Yeah.
So I mean that,
I know that
you
one,
know,
yeah.
you could do like a whole spoken word with your bass with all these words that should be words, or change the definition.
That's a great idea.
Tell us your launch pad from New York, because you were globetrotting after that as well, obviously.
Yes, so I did some globetrotting there because I did tours once in a while, and I met my wife Betsy, who's a dancer. She was touring a lot. What happened is we've been in New York for a long time, and we thought maybe it's time to try something different, and maybe we want to have children, and maybe we don't want to raise children in New York, even though there's tons of positives to that.
Was this the Dinkin era by any chance?
Before that. Before that. Yeah. It was before that. So it was like we thought let's go away and see if we want to raise a family and see what we want to do. So, and this was interesting because since I was freelancing, she was dancing. She'd been in the Maury Lewis company for years. She'd left the company. And she happened to get a job offer for a year or two at UC Santa Cruz.
Okay.
So we decided to go out to California.
Go banana slugs or...
What's that?
Banana slugs?
Yeah, Banana Slugs is the name. UC Santa Cruz is right. It's an interesting place. And so what happened was we ended up going out west and then staying out west. Basically, is how it went. But we did as soon as we got there, we knew a child was coming. It happened very quickly. And so, and I went to Santa Cruz thinking, gee, am I going to be able to deal with this? It's not New York. Yeah. One thing about being in New York for a long time is you can get tunnel vision, because it is one of the greatest cities in the world for the arts, and sometimes you can think it's the only place in the world for the arts.
I think
that's not entirely
suffer
true.
from that too.
Yeah, that can happen. That can happen in a lot of places. I mean, there's a certain provincialism sometimes here in Honolulu that's odd. You know, that can happen in a lot of places. So I thought, is Santa Cruz going to be satisfactory musically? But actually it was. There was a lot of good things going on, partly because there were so many people interested in world music combinations that I hadn't done. I'd done some in New York. I played with an African band. I played with a lot of Brazilian groups, but that still wasn't the same as people that combine all these world fusion things together, and that was really popular in California. So I loved doing that. I met some great players in doing that. That was very satisfactory. I met some good jazz players. I played with the symphony there, and then there was this club called the Kumba in Santa Cruz, and all these mega great bands, if they're going to San Francisco, they do Monday night at the Kumba on their way. So it turned out to be quite good, and we loved that, and we had a child born there. While we were there, that was really great. While we were there, we also went to Helsinki for a minute because Betsy got a Fulbright to teach at the conservatory in Helsinki, which was great because she started a doctoral program there, which meant we got to go back yet another time. And that was very, very interesting to live in Helsinki. But it was only for two 6-month periods over a couple of years apart. And
hopefully the warm period.
Yeah, well, we knew in both cases. One time we knew we were coming back to Santa Cruz, the other time we knew we were coming back to Honolulu, so we weren't too worried about that. And it was great to live in a Scandinavian country because their dedication to the arts is very amazing.
It's paramount.
Very great.
And also to family, I would say.
And to
just
family,
the priorities are very different there.
It was great.
They're quite healthy.
They're very healthy, yeah. Well, Finland has one of the best school systems in the world. They have this great social network system. I mean, some Finns complain about it, but it's really a great situation. And actually, the first time we went, our older boy was only like a year old, but the second time we went was later, and the boys, we had 2 boys, the first grader and 6th grader, so they got to experience living in a Scandinavian city as a 1st grader and a 6th grader, a Scandinavian city in which children are free to roam. They have their own bus passes, they have their own cell phones, everything's safe. In fact, baby prams are left outside of stores in Helsinki.
Because something like that happened in New York City, and this poor woman was demonized because no one understood the cultural reference.
That's correct. She was demonized because she was Danish, and in Denmark, it's the same thing. You leave your pram with your child. I mean, she probably should have known you don't do that in New York, but that's another issue.
That's the baby carriage, friends, in case you're not hip to the term, pram.
Right, that's right. That is the baby carriage. So that was great for us and our children. Because when we were there, we did great projects in dance. Because Betsy, she ended up getting a doctorate from there. So both times we went, she did like an evening-long piece, which then I got to do the music for. And the greatest thing was, especially the second time we went, they had moved their Finnish conservatory into an old building, and they were renovating. I was the first guy in the new recording studio to do it because I was doing my project for this piece that will be a production presented by the conservatory there for Betsy's choreography. And I got to go in this studio and be the first guy. And the first day I walked in, they had something like 42 pairs of microphones mounted in the studio because they were going to start testing mics. What are we going to buy for our studio?
Oh, wow.
It was so cool. Wow. And the Finnish engineers, so I had a whole semester to work on this piece, just me, and I brought in this Swedish guy to play percussion. And we did all the music ourselves, the 2 of us. But the Finnish engineers were fantastic guys, and their concepts, I learned all these different ways of thinking about art and music and recording because of their way the way they see the world, the way they see recording.
Yeah. Wow.
And I got some great stuff out of that. So that was really felt good. Anyway, we were in California. We ended up going to Hong Kong because once when I was in New York, I went on a tour to Asia with a harp trio, harp, guitar, and bass. Yeah, very interesting trio. Another one of these New York stories.
Yeah.
I got a call on the phone. I'm half asleep. Ernie, would you like to do a tour? We're going to India, Sri Lanka, and Hong Kong. These are the dates. This is the money. A regular guy can't do it. Would you do it? And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And then I hung up the phone, and then I went back to sleep, and then I woke up later and said, did I imagine that?
Yeah.
It was a great tour, and I really loved Hong Kong. So when we were in Santa Cruz, we knew we wouldn't stay in Santa Cruz for the long term. It was like, what are we going to do? Back to New York? Where are we going to go? And then somebody sent Betsy an ad for a conservatory teaching job in Hong Kong. She said, interested in Hong Kong. I said, I'm gone.
Was this before the turnover?
It was before the turnover.
So you got to see it right before the
right before the
change.
handover. The handover was 1997, and we were there like 1991 through 1994. It was,
wow.
I love that place, though. I mean, it was exactly as cool as I thought it would be to live there. It's an amazing city. It's it's super bustling.
Yeah.
It's super energetic. It's a gateway to all these other places. So we would go literally vacations, 3 or 4 days. Let's go to Thailand.
Yeah.
Let's go to Bali. And just go to the Philippines. It was fantastic for that because it was close and it was relatively cheap to do it from there. And then the city itself is like New York, pulses with an incredible amount of energy. And even though I love the city of Honolulu, which pulses with more nature, those pulse with money, art, human interaction, those kind of things.
I think a lot of it also is perception. I think they think of themselves as global citizens, and they take stock and they value the perception of being a global citizen.
Yeah.
Whereas in Honolulu, I think it's taken a while for us to warm up. I think the internet and technology has assisted in that realization that you can be a global citizen and still be here. But it took some time, and I think we're still in growing pains of trying to nurture and cultivate the idea that we are global citizens.
Yeah, the internet does aid that, though.
Yeah,
that's well put. It does do that. And Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong is totally a cosmopolitan place. Although it's dominated, of course, by a Chinese and particularly Cantonese way of seeing the world. And that was great to learn that and to get into that. And it was so much fun. And I had incredible work there. So Betsy was at the conservatory, and we had our second son was born there as well. And then I worked part-time at the conservatory, but not for long because I was so much in demand, because if you're an American and you can play, you are going to really work and you can make a lot of money, including doing jazz. I mean, you could get paid well for playing jazz, and then for playing commercial music, you could get paid obscenely well if you demanded that fee and they met your fee, which they sometimes did. So it was fantastic, and I got to play in a great jazz club. I played with some heavy-duty New York musicians I probably wouldn't have played with in New York because I wouldn't have been the very first call guy.
Yeah.
But in Hong Kong I was, and that was great. So I played with major players, and for years, we were there for 3.5 years. It was good fun, and it was also good money. It was a really vibrant city. The art scene was great. All that was very cool. The only reason we decided not to stay was because we had 2 children, and not so much that the handover was coming, because I thought that wouldn't have an immediate influence, and it hasn't. It's had some influence, but it hasn't been extreme. I had friends, mostly Chinese friends, who left to go to Shanghai because they thought Hong Kong, when it gets handed over, it's going to get slapped back because it used to be a colony.
Communist, in the colony,
But I don't even think that happened too much. It has become way more polluted than when I lived there. We lived there before. Anyway, I didn't want to raise our children there, and the reason was, and Betsy agreed with this, because the children of expats aren't quite rooted in a normal sort of way. They grow up it's not quite a normal way of growing up.
It's a bubble.
It's a bubble, and it's a bubble, exactly. And you have maids there, so the maids do a lot of the child raising, too much if you're not careful. So too much so if you don't have a different attitude as parents. I mean, it's great, you don't have to do all that work around the house or anything, but there's that. And so I felt like we needed to raise our children someplace that had better roots. And once again, it was the university job in dance that Betsy saw, and she said, "What about Honolulu?" I never thought of living in Honolulu. That's kind of amazing idea, because we thought, well, maybe we should try it because we could see if we like it, for one thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we'll be closer to Asia if we want to go back and do things, which we've done rarely, but we've done. I've gone back and worked in Hong Kong twice since I lived here, and Japan a few times, but not a lot. But still, it was a good move. I'm glad we did it. So we ended up raising our children in Honolulu, and getting into the Honolulu arts world.
And in the arts world you are. So let's just break it down. So we've established that you are in education and you're a performer, but tell us a little more about the music. We know that you do jazz, but you also do Balkan music.
That's true.
I know that you play in Latin bands. I mean, we want to hear the whole kit and caboodle.
Okay, well, I'm lucky to be able to be in Honolulu and do different styles on the playing side. I also have some interesting teaching work. but that came later. But on the playing side, it's true that like I play a lot of jazz, and I play jazz keys around town. I play some classical music. I don't play classical as often, but I do some music once in a while playing classical. I love it. It's great fun to do. And then I play in a band that does a lot of Balkan and Middle Eastern music, which you know well, a band called Partners in Time.
I have to ask you this.
Yes.
Because it's been a burning question in my mind. How and why did they decide to change the name from Pleasant Peasant Band to Partners in Time?
I don't know because it happened before I came on board.
Okay.
So
okay.
I don't have an answer to that. That's right. It was existing before I was in it.
I was like, is this a PC thing? Or, I mean, because for the longest time, people still called it Pleasant Peasant Band. I think only now people call it Partners in Time, which is a little pun, but if you're not a music person, they might have a hard time remembering that.
They might, yeah. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why that happened. Although I played lots of different kinds of music. I played lots of Latin music. I played African music. I played all that kind. And before I got here, I'd never played Balkan music before. And Middle Eastern music I played in New York some.
Yeah.
But I never played any Balkan music at all. So that was really, I've enjoyed doing that. I do play, I played with a mariachi band here for a while, but that's over because the mariachi band leader left.
Oh.
I play in a great Latin band called Rodney Perez and Tropic Jazz.
Yeah,
Rodney Perez,
they
a very, very good band. And we just got to open the Bruno Mars concert here with that band accompanying Bruno Mars' dad, who's a singer.
Hernandez.
Yeah, exactly. And he's a singer, and he also likes to play timbales. He likes Latin music, so that was really fun. We got to do that with him. And then what other kinds? All those kinds of music. And I play with Hawaiian performers now and then too. I've done some recording and some concerts with them. That's been great. So I play with Makana sometimes. Did Del Beasley's record. I play with Jeff Peterson a lot in the past. You know Jeff.
I do.
Yep. So I've done some of that as well, and that's beautiful. I wouldn't mind doing more. What other styles? Yeah.
Oh, hey, Hot Club of Houlaville.
Hot Club of Houlaville. We play together. We work together with the Hot Club of Houlaville.
It's
so that's
true.
on the jazz side. Yeah, that's correct. We just had some great performances lately.
And the Dylan-esque show was really great because he did the spoken, Jonathan Clark Seipert, who, if you check it out, I think he was on my 3rd or 4th show, did the spoken word, and you played the bass, and it was awesome. It really brought the house down.
That was good fun, and that was kind of an slightly avant-garde type of thing. That was good fun to do.
It's amazing how many sounds can come from the sound of the bass. I think people just think either Seinfeld slapping the bass or upright bass, but I'm not sure if they're aware of the wealth of sounds and music that can come out of your instrument. What I'd like to do is, I know we've got to take a break, but you brought your instrument with us, and let's explore that. That would be kind of cool.
Okay.
Okay.
We will do that.
We'll take our break.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rafi. Every week, I'm right here at ThinkTech Hawaii, 3 p.m. on Mondays. My show is Boris's Bio Briefings. What do we do here? Well, we watch sperm swim. We see if they catch anybody. We check out the latest biosimilars. You know, the kind that, what was his name, the guy with the bicycle? I guess we forgot his name, but he was taking EPO and other human growth factors. We'll be talking about human growth factors. You want to know where to get some? Maybe I'll tell. Anyway, you can catch me, as I said, every week right here, Monday, 3 p.m., ThinkTech Hawaii, Dr. Rafi. You can also find me on Twitter, BioInfoMedical. Or you can catch me on Facebook, Dr. Rafael Boritzer. I'll be happy to converse with you. Aloha.
I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think it's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there.
Aloha and welcome back. This is The Art of Life, and I'm your host, Willow Chang Alion. As I mentioned earlier, we broadcast live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. However, if you can't cut away and watch the internet while you're at work, don't be afraid, because we have all of our back episodes archivally stowed away on YouTube, and I've done all the grunt work for you, and I have put it on our Art of Life with Willow Chang Facebook page, so you can spend your Friday night with a hot date with yourself and learn about people here in Hawaii. My guest is Ernie Provencher, musician, composer, educator, global traveler extraordinaire, and he's going to give us a musical insight and understanding of all of the sounds and the magic that comes from the upright bass. Lo and behold, who is that masked man?
Those are a few interesting textures you can get on the bass or other instruments, but especially the bass is very good for it because it goes from so low to so high. So those are fun things to explore. And then there's also just a good old blues. So this is blues for Mr. Brown, for Ray Brown.
That is awesome.
All right.
You know, I think something that people may not know, because you're watching this on your computer, is the bass is so vibratory. I mean, that's something that you don't necessarily pick up on when you hear a recording, or even if you're sitting in an audience, you're not in close proximity to feel it. But my goodness, I mean, that thing is just humming like a generator. It's pretty amazing. I mean, have you gone into studying harmonics and sound healing or things like that in conjunction with music? Because it's a pretty interesting arena.
That's a great area, and I haven't done that as yet. In fact, I'm about to embark on a lot of studies of literal harmonics, producing the harmonics on the instrument, because since the bass has such long strings and goes so low, it's one of the best instruments. Like you heard me when I played some of the higher squeaky sounds, or sometimes squeaky, some of those higher sounds, some of those were done by creating harmonics. And I am interested in that idea, and I haven't explored it yet.
And I was just thinking, it reminded me of a whale.
Yeah.
Because a whale is able to create those deep booming sounds, but also those really high-pitched sounds that almost sound like cries or laughter. And I was thinking, like, wow, it's like it's a musical whale.
Yeah, it is. And actually, the great bass jazz player Charlie Hayden once did some experimenting on a recording with creating whale sounds on his bass, and he was very good at it. And that would be a fun thing to explore. Actually, that's the area that I'm most interested in going into right now. I'm interested because right now, all over the world, especially in New York, but all over the world, people now are taking instruments and doing really interesting explorations, sonic explorations, sometimes purely acoustically, sometimes incorporating electronics. And I'm interested in both directions. And I'm really excited because particularly bass players and cellists are doing great, interesting work in that field.
Yeah.
Very, very good. And it's the next thing I would like to look into because it kind of brings together jazz, classical, technical understanding, avant-garde, utilizing electronics and art in an expressive art way. Which all of that I think is really exciting, and there's quite a few people doing that. So I actually plan to make a trip to New York, and one of my main focuses is going to be to work with people who are exploring these new kind of compositions, playing techniques, and there's a number of bassists who are doing solo approaches to, where they can play all night by themselves and explore all these different areas, and I really like a lot of their work. So I want to go and meet them and explore and just learn from them, see what's going on. And do more of sort of that little stuff that we did just a moment ago.
Absolutely. The other thing that crossed my mind, I think about these things when I'm driving my car to the show. What are we going to talk about? It's not scripted, as you probably have gathered, but we sure have fun. The bass is interesting because it's right at the juncture where it intersects a rhythmic instrument as well as a melodic instrument. And I was thinking, can I say that? Is that an appropriate statement? Because you could say, oh, well, all instruments are rhythmic. You can play it in a rhythmic way, but the bass has a different quality to it, like a piano, because it's plucked. You can pluck it, you can bow it, but it also can hold, the rhythm section often will include a bass as well as a drum. It can be played like a drum, so it has a different rhythmic quality. It's the timekeeper or the metronome. If we ever have the budget, I just want you to know, I always vote for having bass because it's so essential to kind of keeping everything gelled and keeping it cohesive, because sometimes it's just, can I say this, musical diarrhea. If you don't have that heartbeat or someone to kind of steer you back on path, it can be pretty disastrous, especially with people you've never played with before. Yeah,
and you're right on. I totally agree, and that's probably the most fun thing about being a bass player, especially when you're in a jazz context or something that's jazz-like. You're absolutely right, because you are the link between drums, if there are drums, or I'm providing it if it's not, as you described it. The link between the harmony, the rhythm, the form, and it's the underneath support.
Exactly.
So
that
you have all that
underneath
going.
support is really essential. I've played many times strictly with guitar accompaniment, and I love all the guitarists I've played with. Thank you, gentlemen. But man, if they can pony up to have the bass, it just gives it a different foundation. It's a very grounded, rooted sound, and it's just so much more full-bodied because of the vibration, the wealth of sounds that can come from the bass.
Absolutely.
And it's just more fun. There's more room to play. Everyone can take a turn in a different way and create a different soundscape.
Yeah, and you mentioned, because you were close and you could really feel the vibrations from it. And it's so true for the player, which is great. Because you feel it vibrating against your center.
Absolutely.
And you have your feet rooted on the ground. So even if you're sitting, you're still kind of, because sometimes you sit on a stool to play the bass, but still it's kind of this feeling of you're rooted to the earth, you're producing a lot of vibration, the instrument's producing a lot of vibration, and it's resonating inside my cavity, right? My physical body. So all that makes it super fun to play, along with what you accurately described as the functions it has and can have. And that's so much fun to be in that position, to be the guy or the woman, the man or woman who's doing that in a context, in a musical context. It's a blast.
I wanted to bring this up. It's kind of pedestrian, but hey, I'm a regular Joe. One of the things that I do enjoy about the internet is the sharing of videos. You have this ability to see and share things that maybe you wouldn't stumble upon, but suddenly it's in your news feed. And something that was kind of floating around about 2 weeks ago, and it's still making the rounds, was a gentleman in Indonesia who was playing the boogie-woogie, like the blues piano, with an elephant. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it.
Oh my goodness, I must send it. And the elephant was on the upper register and just playing when it felt like it. It was really interesting. It's like these syncopated things, and there were times when you could tell there was synergy, and his motivation to play at twilight for the elephants is, he said, this is when they're a little more active, but it kind of keeps them focused to hear the music. And this has been making the rounds and people have been sharing it, and I just thought, wow, why is it that people have forgotten the importance of music. I mean, I think people, to some degree, it plays in the elevator, or you just turn on the radio, you tune out, you don't listen to it, and we need to see an elephant playing the piano to be reminded how essential music is to just our enjoyment of life, our self-expression.
Well, one other thing that maybe has a negative influence on that is technology in this sense.
Yeah.
How many young people know the sound of music coming out of only their computer speakers or only out of earbud headphones?
Yeah.
So that's exactly the opposite of what you were talking about, this big wooden vibration.
Yeah.
That's a very different thing than hearing
the
an
compressed file.
and the compressed files. That's the other thing, is that the music is such a compressed file that it's not the real experience of it. And that is you bring up a good point.
Yeah.
That's a worry, like people only hearing it in the elevator, only hearing it in this kind of reduced form.
Yeah.
That's why who's that rocker, Neil Young, is doing a new kind of service where he's trying
music.
Yeah, and music is to be very uncompressed. He wants the files, the digital files, to be sampled in such a way so there's lots of bits and lots of space, and so that everything isn't compressed down, and that's what he wants to do.
You know, in the 80s, I'm a child of the 80s, Dead or Alive comes to mind. I don't know if you remember Pete Burns, You Spin Me Right Round, right round like a record, baby, right round, round, round. But it was something that a single was made, and then every DJ under the sun would like have different variations, and a lot of times if you bought an extended maxi single, they'd even have like a karaoke version if you wanted to, I don't know, dance to it or sing to it.
Yeah.
But they played a lot with the recording process where if you had earphones on, it sounded like the sound was going from one ear to the other, and I always thought that was so thrilling because it's another way of experiencing the sound going through your body. And I completely agree with what you said about the earbuds. Now, I was gifted, because I don't always have the kala, but it was like my best Christmas gift ever.
Yeah.
I know it was a free gift with like American Express, but that's okay, because a gift is a gift. Bose earphones. I mean, not only the option to cancel out the noise when you're on the plane, which is just a joy.
That's good, yeah.
But to hear music, everything I listen to with a really good set of headphones, it's like you're hearing it for the first time. Even if you've listened to it 1,000 times before, you put on a really good quality pair of earphones, and it is remarkable what you hear that you just don't hear when you are playing it, cleaning house or what have you.
And it probably means you're also a little more immersed in the music. If they're sending you headphones, it's not likely that you're talking on the phone or watching TV or whatever. It's not likely that you're doing that, and that's kind of great. I try to find time also to do headphone listening, and to sometimes just sit in my living room and just put the speakers on and make sure I don't do anything else and just listen to something.
I call it the active listening. It's one of the reasons why I actually miss records, because you were required to have active listening, because if you had to flip the record, and you also didn't want to screw up your needle.
Yeah.
You know, so if you were like an audiophile, you would sit there, and even if I listened to Abbey Road or certain albums, and I hear one song, I know exactly what song, like sequentially, was formatted for the U.S. audience, because I would listen to those records so many times, or Simon and Garfunkel or whatever. And it's interesting, because then when you hear the song out of that context, your brain is already jumping to what you've heard, but then, you know, maybe you're listening to the radio and then
So
it's James Taylor or something.
Right.
We're going to run out of time, but I will say this, because every one of my guests, I always want to have them as a repeat offender and have you come again, because there's so many things we have yet to discuss. But for those who want to follow Ernie and what he does musically, how can they get in touch with you, or, you know, what gigs do you have up and coming, or, you know, the call to action?
That is a good, and I don't have a website, so that is the first thing I need to do. I'm a little bit not technical, and I don't have a Facebook or a website, so I need to correct those things, and then it'll become easier. But in the meantime,
make your sons do it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's what I should do.
It's like, you want an allowance? Make my website.
That's a good plan. Just watch the papers, I guess, and once in a while my name will pop up in relation to something. Interesting gig. I am always doing good gigs. Nothing jumps to mind, although this Sunday afternoon at the Rafters, if you know what the Rafters are, and the Rafters is not a commercial place, but I'm playing with a great group there on this Sunday. So you could call Ward's Rafters in the phone book.
That's in Kamakee. That's your hint.
Yeah, you could do that, and then otherwise I'll have to come back with a website or something.
Yeah. Definitely. You know what? Leave us with this for our people who want to get more out of music, or maybe they have kids at home, or they want to pursue music. What type of advice would you give people in the pursuit of that?
I think that's a great one.
Yeah.
If it's children, try to get them to hear live music somewhere. Get them to go to symphony or something at school. And also the other thing would be to encourage them, if they're in a school where they have an option of learning an instrument, they'll be exposed to it, and you know, encourage them. I don't think you should force somebody who's totally opposed to it, but if you can possibly get them to do it. I teach at the Honolulu Waldorf School. I teach orchestra there, strings. I teach band at the Honolulu School, and I've seen how great it is for the kids. Just today, we had our morning concert at Honolulu, and the children had an amazingly good time.
That's
so
awesome.
it's really rewarding for the children, and there's a lot of concepts that believe it's good for their general education as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so get them to hear some live music. That's probably the best thing.
Absolutely, because not only does it help train their brain, their mind, and it fires off the cylinders artistically, but it also aids them in knowing how to interact in public. That's the one thing that makes me sad is it seems like a lot of people don't know how to interact with live music. They don't know what the decorum is or what's respectful conduct. And then the other thing is, people who may not be verbal, music is a great way to be expressive without having to say anything. And so if you have a child that maybe doesn't want to talk or they don't feel comfortable saying how they feel, but they can pick up an instrument, they can write music, they can be conversant through their music. So there's so many roads to be expressive and creative.
That's a great idea for children, especially like you say, if they're not verbally communicative, but they can let their feelings out another way, and they can, if they play an instrument, they interact with other children. So that's a different kind of interaction. And I have seen that. I've seen children that, like maybe on the playground, they're not hanging out with everybody else, but then in my strings room, they're interacting and they're having a good time together, and sometimes, of course, they're sometimes the best ones.
Exactly.
So that can help.
It doesn't always have to involve a ball. Think about that.
That's true.
You know? So,
Yeah,
such a joy, Ernie. Thank you for joining us. I'm sad that we've run out of time, but I know I'll see you really soon, musically and hopefully on the show again.
We'll do it again, and it's been, keep doing this. Is a great project for you to put on the air.
Indeed. We have fun here. This is The Art of Life. Hope to see you next Friday, 2:00 p.m. Keeping it Pono. Aloha.
Thank you.